Little girl saves a dying puppy. What happens next is unbelievable. She wasn't supposed to be out at that hour. The moon hung low, casting an otherworldly glow across the quiet suburban street. The chilly autumn air rustled the remaining leaves in the trees that lined the sidewalks. 13-year-old had slipped out of her bedroom window, led by a feeling she couldn't quite name, something like a whisper in her soul telling her she needed to leave the house that very moment. She had no explanation for it, no words to describe why she couldn't simply wait until morning. It was as though the universe insisted she step outside. Heart pounding and breath already catching in her throat, she crept away from her house, the porch light extinguished, and carefully avoided any rustling that might alert her parents. She took slow, deliberate steps, heading down the sidewalk in her pink pants and an oversized hoodie. She didn't even pause to slip on proper shoes. Her feet were clad only in fuzzy socks that were now collecting bits of gravel and dampness from the dew-laden ground, flickered overhead, painting phantom-like shapes on the pavement. In the distance, a lone car engine hummed, and somewhere far off, a dog barked, a low, sorrowful sound. Glanced around, the hair on the back of her neck standing up. She felt as though every shadow concealed a secret. Despite her fear, she pressed on, propelled by an odd certainty that she had a purpose out here. She just didn't know yet what it was. The night was too quiet, as though the world were holding its breath. Her pulse fluttered with each step. She reached the end of the block when she felt a sudden jolt in her chest, a tangible pang of anxiety that made her gasp. She stopped. Her eyes scanned the darkness. Nothing appeared unusual, at least not at first glance. A porch light 2 houses down switched off, casting that yard into darkness. A cat darted across the street, eyes reflecting neon green in the lamp's glow. Then she heard it, a faint whimper, so soft that if the breeze had been a little louder, she would have missed it. Her legs moved before her mind fully registered what she'd heard. She felt pulled as though magnetized toward the sound. The whimper came again, a tiny, pitiful cry that sliced through the silence, stirring compassion in his chest. Fear turned to urgency. She followed the noise, creeping past an old oak tree, stepping around a rusted mailbox leaning to one side. The whimper was becoming clearer, a trembling mew like a creature in immense pain. His eyes swept the base of the tree, the dew-drenched lawn, and the slivers of moonlight illuminating the curb. There, half hidden beneath a wilted bush, something small quivered. It took her a moment to recognize the shape of a tiny puppy, its fur matted and dirty, its eyes squeezed shut in agony. Even in the darkness, she could see the pup's fragile ribs protruding from its chest. The small creature was struggling to breathe, each wheeze accompanied by a soft cry. Dropped to her knees, uncaring that the wet grass soaked through her pants, she gently pushed aside the branches of the bush. Her heart clenched. The puppy's fur was caked with something dark, maybe mud, maybe blood. She couldn't tell in the pale light. She reached out but hesitated. She was terrified she might hurt it further by touching it the wrong way. Yet she couldn't just leave it there. The pup needed help, and she was the only one around. "It's okay, I'm here," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and compassion. The dog let out another weak whimper as though drawn to the gentle sound of her voice. Looked around frantically, hoping to see someone, anyone, who might know what to do. But the street was deserted. It was all on her. She slowly scooped the tiny body into her arms. The puppy felt so light, so heartbreakingly delicate. She could sense the trembling, the labored breaths. It was barely alive. Tears welled up in her eyes, 1,000 emotions colliding. Heartbreak, rage at whoever or whatever had left this creature in such a condition, and a fierce determination to do something, anything, to save its life. Rose unsteadily, glancing back toward her house. Her parents likely had no clue she was gone, but if they discovered her missing and found her returning with an injured stray puppy, they would surely be furious. At first, anyway. She thought of her mother's stern voice, her father's worried face, and she cringed. But a life was on the line. There was no question about it. The puppy needed immediate care. She had to try. She held the puppy close to her chest, giving it what warmth she could. Its heartbeat was faint and irregular. Bit her lip, blinking back the tears that threatened to spill down her cheeks. She began her trek back toward home, each step riddled with silent prayers. "Hold on," she kept whispering, "please hold on." Her feet were numb by the time she slipped quietly through her backyard gate. She tried the back door, but it was locked. She remembered locking it earlier in the evening. With the puppy whimpering in her arms, she contemplated climbing back through her bedroom window. The thought of juggling the injured creature while scaling the side of her house was daunting, but time felt urgent. She couldn't waste precious minutes hunting for a key. She tiptoed across the yard, her heart hammering as she eyed the plastic lawn chair beneath her bedroom window. Carefully, she placed the puppy on the soft cushion of the chair, then climbed onto the seat next to it, 1 foot at a time. Setting her palms against the siding, she rose on her tiptoes, reaching for the window ledge. With a quiet grunt, she managed to push the window open. Her parents often scolded her for leaving it unlocked, but tonight it was a blessing. She pulled herself up and slithered inside, then quickly reached out to gently lift the puppy in. She held it close again, relieved to be in the warmth of her room. Her breathing was ragged, and she forced herself to stay calm. There was no one to ask for help. Her family didn't have any pets, and while her mom had grown up with dogs in her childhood, it wasn't like could just run into her parents' bedroom and exclaim, "I found a dying puppy outside." They might not react the way she hoped. She needed a plan. She laid the puppy on a folded towel she'd retrieved from the bathroom. The creature's eyes flickered, half open, revealing a milky glaze that indicated it was in shock or near death. Felt panic twist in her stomach. She needed to do something fast, but her mind spun with question after question. Did it need water, food, medical attention? She was only 13. She'd never even been to a veterinary clinic. Her only knowledge came from a few YouTube videos she'd watched about basic pet care. But none of those videos had prepared her for the sight of a half-dead animal lying at her feet. Her hands shook as she ran to the bathroom. She filled a small bowl with lukewarm water, grabbed a spare dropper they used for a sibling's medicine, and snagged the first aid kit. She hurried back to her room, closed the door quietly behind her, and knelt by the towel. The puppy's breathing rattled, its tiny chest rising and falling with heart-wrenching difficulty. Felt tears threaten once more, but stubbornly held them back. She had to focus. She dripped a tiny bit of water into the pup's mouth, half expecting it not to respond. Then a slight flick of the tongue, a weak attempt to swallow. Relief coursed through her like a jolt of electricity. At least it was trying. She carefully repeated the process, mindful not to flood the puppy's mouth. After a few drops, she paused. Its breathing still sounded terrible, but at least now there was a glimmer of hope that it could swallow fluids. Examining the creature more closely, she noticed a gash on its side. Though it wasn't bleeding profusely, the fur around it was crusted with dried blood. Her stomach flipped at the thought of how much pain the little thing must be in. She rummaged through the first aid kit, pulling out antiseptic wipes. With the gentlest touch she could manage, she dabbed at the wound, cleaning away the grime. The puppy whimpered, its tiny body quaking, but knew she couldn't stop. If she didn't clean it, there was a high chance of infection if it wasn't already infected. She whispered, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," over and over as she worked, tears threatening to blur her vision. The minutes ticked by in a haze. She lost track of time. All that existed was the dog's fragile life in her care. At one point she thought she heard movement in the hallway, footsteps outside her door. Every muscle tensed, but then the house fell silent again. Eventually she had done all she could think to do. A bit of cleaning, some water, a tiny piece of bread soaked in milk, which the puppy weakly sniffed. Placed her hand gently on the pup's flank, feeling its body temperature. It was cold, but not yet dangerously so. The intangible sense of urgency flared again. She needed real help, not just her improvised care. Her gaze flicked to the clock on her nightstand. It was past midnight. The chance of getting a vet at this hour was slim. Her parents would never consent to drive her to an emergency clinic for a stray, and she had no money saved up except for a few dollars from her allowance. No, if she were going to do anything, she would have to do it on her own. She grabbed her phone, swiped through it, and searched for emergency puppy care and what to do if you find an injured dog. A wave of confusion and dread washed over her. Every website gave a long list of what to check, what to do, and where to go. Meanwhile, the puppy emitted another weak cry. She clicked her phone off. Time was slipping away. An idea popped into her head. Her neighbor down the street, Ms. Weber, volunteered at an animal shelter. She'd once told that if she ever needed help with a stray cat or dog, she could call her anytime. Could that have been said lightly, or would Ms. Weber really be open to a call in the middle of the night? Bit her lip, heart thudding. If Ms. Weber didn't answer or if she was upset, that could cause trouble. But if she did answer, maybe, just maybe, she'd know what to do. With trembling fingers, typed out a text. She didn't want to call and risk waking up the entire household. Ms. Weber, it's from down the street. I found a puppy that's badly hurt. I don't know what to do. Please help. Her hands hovered over the phone. She hesitated, then pressed send. Her eyes stayed glued to the screen, waiting. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3. No reply. The silence was suffocating. She thought of calling, but she was terrified Ms. Weber would be furious to hear from someone at this time. Then again, she had no other options. Summoning her courage, initiated a phone call. It rang once, twice. She considered hanging up in panic. On the fourth ring, a groggy voice answered, hello. His throat tightened. She forced out the words in a frantic whisper, Ms. Weber, I'm so sorry it's late. I found a puppy and it hurt really bad. I didn't know who else to call. There was a moment of silence, then Ms. Weber's voice steadied. Calm down. Where are you? Are your parents there? What happened? Quickly explained. She'd snuck out, found the puppy, and brought it home. She admitted she hadn't told her parents yet. Ms. Weber, to his relief, didn't scold her. She only sighed into the phone, a mixture of concern and resignation. Oh dear. I wish you'd told an adult right away, but I understand. Let me get dressed and I'll come over. In the meantime, keep the puppy warm. You said you're giving it water. That's good. Just drops at a time, okay? I'll be there in 5 minutes. His heart soared with relief. After hanging up, she hurried to wrap the puppy more securely in a soft blanket. She stroked its head, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. Help is coming, she whispered. True to her word, Ms. Weber arrived in under 10 minutes, stepping through his bedroom window after a short discussion in hushed voices outside, both praying that no other neighbors were awakened by the strange sight of a woman climbing into a teenager's window in the dead of night. Ms. Weber's concern overrode any embarrassment. She wore a heavy coat over her nightgown and carried a small kit of her own, reminiscent of the supplies one might find in a veterinary clinic's on-call bag. She quickly surveyed the puppy's condition, brow creased with worry. Poor thing, she murmured, her voice gentle. She checked its gums, took its temperature with a small device from her kit, examined the wound, and listened to the ragged breathing. It's very weak. We need to get it to a vet. There's an after-hours emergency clinic in the next town. I know the vet who works nights. Nodded, feeling a mixture of hope and dread. Will I have to tell my parents? She asked, voice trembling with guilt. Ms. Weber gave her a sad, understanding look. It's best if they know. This is important and, well, a serious situation, but let me handle that. I'll explain that you did the right thing by trying to save this little life. Fear twisted in his gut as Ms. Weber took the lead, heading down the hallway to the master bedroom. Hovered behind, cradling the puppy, tears pricking her eyes. She didn't want to see her parents' reaction when Ms. Weber explained what had happened. Her sneaking out, the puppy's condition, the urgent need to rush to an emergency vet. She braced herself for yelling, or worse, the look of disappointment she dreaded seeing in her father's gentle brown eyes. Her mother answered the door first. Confusion etched across her features at the sight of Ms. Weber standing there, hair askew, coat over pajamas. What on earth? Her mother began, but Ms. Weber jumped in. "There's an emergency," and came to me for help. She stepped aside so could stand next to her, revealing the small bundle in her arms. The puppy was so silent now it looked lifeless. His mother's eyes widened. His father appeared behind her, also in his night clothes. He immediately noticed the puppy, his expression hardening in concern. Expected a tirade, but instead her father carefully touched the pup's head and whispered, "Oh my goodness. Where did you find it?" No anger, just worry. Quickly recounted the story between sobs, admitting to sneaking out. She ended with a shaky apology. Her father met her gaze and pulled her into a hug, puppy and all, as if trying not to jostle the fragile creature. "I'm not happy you snuck out," he said quietly, "but I'm so proud you didn't just walk away from an animal in pain. Let's see what we can do to save it." With that, the family piled into Ms. Weber's old station wagon. Sat in the back with the puppy on her lap, Ms. Weber in the driver's seat, her parents in front. The night's silence had given way to the engine's roar as they sped down empty streets. Rain began to sprinkle against the windshield, adding an extra layer of urgency. Each bump in the road made the puppy whimper softly, and each time soothed it with gentle strokes and calming words she wasn't sure it could hear. She willed it to stay alive, to keep breathing, to hold on just a bit longer. The emergency clinic was a small building on the outskirts of the neighboring town, its windows glowing in the darkness like a beacon of hope. Ms. Weber parked by the entrance. They rushed inside, the fluorescent lights washing over them, making everything feel harsh and urgent. A veterinary assistant hurried over, eyes widening at the battered puppy in his arms. The next minutes blurred. Forms to fill out, hurried explanations. The pup whisked away into the back by the on-call vet. Stood shivering near the reception desk, uncertain if the tears on her face were from the cold or from the depths of emotion swirling inside her. Time stretched, warped. The clinic's waiting area was eerily quiet, just a few plastic chairs, stale coffee in a dispenser that hadn't been emptied in hours, a flickering TV in the corner broadcasting a late-night talk show to no one in particular. His parents hovered close, her mother rubbing circles on his back, her father pacing with worry in his eyes. Ms. Weber spoke softly with the receptionist, presumably giving the staff some of the shelter's information in case they needed a place to house the puppy later. Finally, a woman in scrubs emerged, removing her face mask. She wore a reassuring expression but had lines of concern etched around her eyes. "I'm Doctor," she introduced herself. "First, let me say you all did the right thing getting this puppy here so quickly." She paused, glancing at her chart. "The situation is critical. The pup's body temperature is quite low, and there's evidence of malnourishment, possible internal injury. We'll need to do more tests, x-rays, and blood work. Right now, we're stabilizing it with fluids and trying to get its temperature up. We'll do everything we can." His knees felt wobbly. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to speak. Will it make it?" The question came out in a choked whisper. Doctor sighed, her face compassionate. "I can't promise anything yet. We have a fighting chance. Dogs are resilient, especially puppies, but it's touch and go." She offered a small, reassuring smile. "Stay hopeful. If there's any chance this little one can pull through, we'll find it." With that, the vet disappeared back into the exam room, leaving the family in tense silence. His parents guided her to a chair. She stared at the floor, the fluorescent lights reflecting off the linoleum. Emotions welled in her: guilt, fear, hope, an inexplicable protective love for this creature she'd only just met but already felt bonded to. She remembered the first time she'd seen it trembling under that bush, and her heart clenched with renewed determination. You have to live, she thought fervently, you just have to. Minutes melted into hours. The clock on the wall ticked toward 3 a.m., then 4 a.m. eventually. Ms. Weber insisted his parents drive her home. She volunteered to stay at the clinic and give them updates, but refused to leave. Despite the exhaustion, she needed, to be there if the puppy opened its eyes. She wanted her face to be the first thing it saw, to let it know it wasn't alone. Her mother relented, understanding the gravity of the situation, and the three remained, dozing fitfully on uncomfortable chairs, until the first light of dawn touched the clinic's windows. Sometime after sunrise, Doctor emerged again, her face tired but hopeful. She addressed them in hushed tones, explaining that the puppy had made it through the night and was responding to fluids, but it still faced a long, uncertain recovery. She suggested that they keep it hospitalized for at least a few days, monitor vital signs, and continue medical treatment. The question of cost came up and bit her lip, eyes wide with worry. Her father asked about expenses. The sum doctor mentioned was not small, but Ms. Weber offered some assistance through the shelter's emergency fund for stray animals. Relief and gratitude overwhelmed them all. 3 days passed in a sleepless blur. His mind was in a perpetual state of anxiety as she shuffled between school and the clinic. Every day after the final bell rang, she raced to the building, ignoring the curious stares of her classmates who couldn't figure out why she no longer lingered to chat or even paused at her locker. She just ran. Each time she arrived breathless, her heart pounding in anticipation of the veterinarian's latest update. The puppy remained in critical care, but each day there were small signs of improvement. A steadier heartbeat, a slight wag of the tail, a flicker of awareness in those once glazed eyes. His parents, seeing the depth of her devotion, softened more with each visit, slowly warming to the idea that maybe, just maybe, they could adopt the puppy if it survived. Dared not let herself dream too far ahead, but she clung to the possibility. On the fourth day, Doctor permitted to visit the puppy in a small recovery room. The moment stepped inside, the pup lifted its head, just barely, but enough for her to see those soulful, expressive eyes looking right at her. It was as if the dog recognized her, the person who had scooped it off the cold ground and fought so fiercely for its life. Tears sprang to his eyes, a mix of relief and pure joy. She knelt by the crate, gingerly reaching out her fingers. The pup sniffed her hand, then offered the tiniest lick, a gesture so weak it nearly broke his heart all over again. She whispered, "Hi there, little one. You keep fighting, okay?" Doctor leaned in, smiling at the scene. "We're still not out of the woods," she cautioned, "but I'm optimistic. The puppy's fighting spirit is strong." She then added, "Have you thought of a name?" His cheeks flushed. She had been thinking of it, but she didn't want to name it too soon, afraid of jinxing the fragile life. But at that moment, the word sprang to her lips. "Miracle," she said softly. "Because it's a miracle it even survived this long." Doctor nodded, her eyes warm. "Miracle it is." Word spread quickly around the neighborhood that had found an abandoned, injured puppy, and was doing all she could to save it. Ms. Weber spoke about it to her fellow volunteers at the shelter. Soon, neighbors were asking parents about the pup's condition. One family even offered to help with vet bills, a gesture that moved to tears. She felt a surge of hope in the collective support and kindness. But just when it seemed that Miracle was on a trajectory of healing, something happened that rattled everyone. On the fifth night at the clinic, as was preparing to say goodnight to Miracle, she still had homework to finish, and her father insisted she come home at a reasonable time. She noticed a strange restlessness in the pup. Miracle whimpered, pacing unsteadily in the crate, breathing heavier than usual. Alarmed, called Doctor, who took the puppy's vitals. Her expression grew serious. "There might be an internal complication we didn't catch. I need to run some tests right away." At that moment, everything slowed down. His vision blurred with tears as the staff gently asked her and her father to leave the exam room. She felt a suffocating weight of dread. They had come so far only to risk losing Miracle now. She slumped in a plastic chair, her father's arm around her shoulders, comforting in silence. His mind churned. She prayed, pleading internally, "Please don't let it end this way. Please don't let me lose this little one." After an agonizing hour, Doctor emerged once more. The lines in her face betrayed exhaustion. She explained that Miracle's lungs seemed to have fluid buildup, likely from a previously undetected trauma to the chest. The immediate solution was a delicate procedure to drain the fluid and keep the pup stable. Risks were high. "We'll do our best," was all the vet could promise. His father looked at her, anguish in his eyes. "What do you want to do, honey?" And tears streaming, her voice surprisingly steady, said, "We have to try. We can't give up on her." So they approved the procedure, signing the consent forms with trembling hands. Then they waited. Time dragged with excruciating slowness. In that hush of the clinic's night shift, the only sounds were occasional footsteps and the of a machine from behind the doors leading to the operating area. Finally, near midnight, Doctor and her assistant reappeared, pulling off surgical gloves. There was no dramatic grin, no immediate cheer which made his heart plummet, but the vet's tone was measured. "We've stabilized her. The fluid is drained. I can't promise we won't see more complications, but for now, Miracle is hanging on." Relief spiraled through his body, leaving her weak. She whispered a thank you, although she wasn't sure to whom, Doctor, or something bigger than all of them. For the next few days, juggled school, family life, and endless visits to the clinic. Each day, Miracle seemed to regain strength. Tentative steps replaced feeble twitching, and within a week the puppy could stand, wobbly but determined. His entire face lit up the first time she saw Miracle try to bark. It was more like a squeak, but it was a sound of life, a sound of hope. Meanwhile, the question of how and why Miracle ended up in such a dire situation loomed overhead. Kept wondering if someone had abused the puppy, or if it was part of a stray litter, if it had owners who had carelessly tossed it out, or if it was born on the streets. The more she wondered, the angrier she got. Ms. Weber tried to console her, saying, "Sometimes accidents happen. Sometimes dogs wander off. And sometimes people do terrible things. We may never know. But what we do know is that we're here now, doing our best to help." Took solace in that, though she couldn't fully quell her fury at the injustice. Then one Saturday morning, a sudden knock on the door startled as she was washing dishes. She hurried to see who it was. Ms. Weber stood on the porch, looking unusually tense. Next to her was a tall, broad-shouldered man in a uniform that read Animal Control. Parents joined her at the door, exchanging perplexed glances. "Morning, Ms. Weber said quietly, stepping inside. "This is Officer Daniels from Animal Control. He has a few questions about the puppy you found." His heart thudded. Instantly, her mind leapt to a worst-case scenario. Were they here to confiscate Miracle? Did someone claim it was their dog and wanted it back? Officer Daniels removed his cap, nodding politely. "I understand you've been caring for a severely injured stray. We appreciate your compassion. However, we have to check into certain matters. We received an anonymous tip that this puppy may have come from a group of dogs that were being mistreated in a property on the other side of town. The teepster claims the owner of that property might have dumped the puppy after it got injured." Horror snaked through his veins. The mere thought of Miracle being intentionally discarded made her chest tighten. "Is that person going to be arrested?" she asked, her voice high and tense. "We're investigating," Officer Daniels said, his expression neutral. "For now, I need to confirm some details with you. If we can establish a link, we might be able to file charges. We also want to ensure the puppy is safe. I understand it's still receiving veterinary care." Nodded. Her mother placed a protective hand on shoulder and her father spoke up, explaining the timeline of everything that had happened. The late-night rescue, the emergency vet visits, the procedures, and the ongoing recovery. Officer Daniels took notes, occasionally asking questions about times, locations, and whether they saw anyone suspicious that night. After collecting all the information, Officer Daniels thanked them, gave them a card, and headed out. Ms. Weber lingered, her eyes still filled with concern. "This could get messy," she told his parents. "If it turns out there's an abusive situation, they might try to claim the dog back or cause trouble, but's done nothing wrong." She offered a soft smile at, "We'll do everything to protect you and Miracle." Felt a swirl of emotions, anger, fear, and a fierce protectiveness toward the puppy. She didn't want any part of a legal battle, but more than that, She couldn't stand the idea that someone might try to reclaim Miracle only to mistreat her again. "I won't let them," she said quietly, a resolve shining in her eyes. A few days later, just as Miracle was nearly ready to be discharged from the vet's care, the unthinkable happened. A woman appeared at the clinic claiming to be Miracle's owner. The staff called family in a rush. Her father received the message while at work, relayed it to his mother, and within an hour they were all piling into the car, hearts racing. When they arrived, Ms. Weber was already there, standing near the reception desk, arguing politely but firmly with a tall, gaunt woman in a threadbare jacket. The woman insisted that the puppy was hers, that it had run away, and that she wanted it back. Doctor looked distressed, caught in the middle. Eyes zeroed in on the woman, noticing she seemed agitated, possibly under the influence of something. She reeked of cigarette smoke, her nails caked with dirt. Couldn't help but feel a wave of revulsion. Is this the person who dumped Miracle? The very idea made quake with fury. Her father approached calmly, introducing himself. "I'm sorry, but could you tell us how this puppy came to be so injured?" he asked pointedly. The woman's eyes flicked around, trying to compose a story, stumbling over her words. She claimed she had left the pup with a friend for a few days and came back to find it missing. She had no idea how it got hurt. Ms. Weber jumped in, stepping forward. "This puppy was found half dead. It's been hospitalized for nearly 2 weeks. If you're truly its owner, where have you been all this time?" The question hung in the air like a sword. The woman's gaze shifted, and a flash of anger darkened her features. She mumbled something about not having a phone and out of town for work, but the explanation felt flimsy, contrived. Felt her mother's hand grip her shoulder, as if to restrain her from saying anything impulsive. The tension in the room was palpable. Meanwhile, Doctor gestured for everyone to step into a private office. Inside, Officer Daniels sat, arms crossed, observing the scene. Realized he must have been alerted as well. The woman's claims were met with polite skepticism. Officer Daniels asked her to provide any documentation, photos, or proof that the puppy belonged to her. She stammered, saying she had none. Then she blurted, "Just look at it. It's got a white patch on its chest. I know my own dog, for crying out loud." "Lots of dogs have a white patch," Ms. Weber countered softly. "You'll need more than that." The woman's face twisted with frustration. She yelled that she was being robbed, that these people were trying to steal her dog. Doctor calmly explained that the puppy was a stray brought in by Good Samaritans and was undergoing life-saving treatment. If the woman wanted custody, she needed to go through the proper channels, including settling the veterinary bills, which had reached a considerable sum. That last part made the woman pause. She faltered, her expression revealing she clearly had no intention, or means, to pay. Then, perhaps sensing she wasn't going to win easily, she turned on her heel, muttering curses under her breath, and left in a rush, slamming the clinic door so hard it rattled the windows. Officer Daniels exhaled, shaking his head. "We'll keep an eye out. If she files a claim, we'll have to investigate. But from what I've seen, she has no documentation, no believable story, and no demonstrated care for this animal's welfare." He turned to his father. "Are you folks planning to adopt the pup if it's released?" His father hesitated, glancing at his wife. She gave a small nod, tears glinting in her eyes, the emotional toll of the whole ordeal weighing heavily on her heart. "Yes," he said softly but firmly, "we are. If Miracle pulls through, we'd be honored to give her a home." The swirl of relief, happiness, and lingering anxiety crashed over. She wanted to throw her arms around her parents, to cry with gratitude for their support, yet the memory of that woman's claim unsettled her. There was a chance, however small, that this wasn't the end of it. Within days, though, the clinic discharged Miracle into his care. The vet was confident the puppy was stable enough to finish her recovery at home, provided they followed strict guidelines. Special food, medication for infection, frequent checkups. Took each instruction to heart, determined to ensure Miracle's health. Bringing Miracle home was a moment would never forget. She prepared a small, cozy corner of her room with blankets and a soft bed. The puppy, though still weak, wagged her tail slowly at the sight of, as though recognizing her savior. Knelt down, tears in her eyes, letting the puppy's warm tongue graze her hand. She spoke in a soft, soothing voice, "Welcome home, Miracle, you're safe now." The next week was full of challenges, waking up multiple times a night to feed the pup, cleaning up messes, administering meds, all while juggling homework. But refused to complain. The exhaustion was overshadowed by her deep joy in seeing Miracle's progress, the sparkle returning to her eyes, the bounce in her step, the puppy-like curiosity that had been suppressed by pain and exhaustion. Neighbors dropped by with homemade dog treats, toys, and well wishes. Ms. Weber checked in daily, offering tips from her shelter experience. Evan's grandparents, who lived a few towns over, came to visit and were charmed by Miracle's timid but sweet demeanor. Happiness blossomed in his household, a sense of pride that they had done something truly meaningful, saved a life that was on the brink. Still, a sense of foreboding lingered at the back of his mind, as though everything was too perfect, too serene. She tried to push the fear aside, focusing instead on each small milestone. Miracle's bark growing stronger, her gait more steady, her appetite healthy. But late one afternoon, while was walking Miracle on a leash in the backyard, she noticed a black van idling down the street. She couldn't see who was inside because of the tinted windows. It lingered for a few minutes, then slowly drove off. A chill crawled over skin. Was she imagining things, or was someone watching them? She told her parents about it. Her father suggested that it might just be a delivery van or a neighbor's friend. Agreed, but her intuition nagged at her that something was off. In the days that followed, she found herself peering out her window at odd hours, half expecting to see that black van again. She worried that the woman who'd appeared at the clinic might try to come back for Miracle, and that possibility filled with dread. Sure enough, one night, a loud knock startled the family during dinner. His father opened the front door. A man stood on the porch, wearing a worn leather jacket, face unshaven and eyes wild. He didn't introduce himself but barked, "I heard you have my dog." Froze in the hallway, her heart pounding. She recognized something in his face, an unsettling resemblance to the woman at the clinic. He must be related to her. "We don't have your dog," her father replied calmly. "We adopted a stray puppy that was." "Yeah, that's the one," the man interrupted, voice slurring slightly. "I'm here to get it." His father tensed, stepping out onto the porch and closing the door behind him to keep the stranger from barging in. Through the window, saw their silhouettes, heard muffled voices. She clutched Miracle, who whimpered at the tension. After a few tense minutes, the man stormed off, kicking over a potted plant on the porch before climbing into that same black van and speeding away. Her father came back inside, his face grave. "He claimed we stole the dog. I told him to leave. If he comes back, I'm calling the police." His mother wrapped an arm around her, trembling. "We have to protect Miracle. Who knows what he or that woman will do?" The household went on heightened alert. Doors were locked at all times, the backyard gate secured. They spoke to Ms. Weber and Officer Daniels, who advised them to file a formal complaint if the harassment continued. In the meantime, they kept Miracle's walks limited to the backyard, always supervised. Felt a pit of anxiety gnawing at her stomach, remembering what Ms. Weber had said. This could get messy. A week passed with no further incidents. Gradually, tension ebbed. Then one night, as the family was asleep, the sound of glass shattering jolted them awake. Bolted upright, heart hammering, she rushed to her bedroom window and saw the flicker of a shadow in the backyard. Her father, armed with a baseball bat, raced downstairs to investigate. Her mother called 911. Clutched Miracle, who was trembling and barking softly, clearly sensing the danger. The minutes felt like hours until sirens cut through the night. Red and blue lights lit up the dark street. Police officers swarmed the backyard. They found evidence of a break-in attempt. A broken window, footprints in the damp soil near the back fence, and the partial imprint of a palm on the glass. but whoever it was had fled before the police arrived, shook with fear, hugging Miracle tightly. This was no coincidence. Someone was trying to get the puppy, and not for any benevolent reason. Over the next few days, the police increased patrols in the area. Officer Daniel stopped by to assure them that an investigation was. He mentioned that the property on the other side of town, once rumored to have multiple animals in poor condition, had been found abandoned, no dogs in sight. The owners, a man and a woman, were nowhere to be found, but neighbors described them as living in a black van before they vanished. Blood turned cold at the revelation. These people likely had some twisted motive involving Miracle. Maybe they were involved in dog fighting or breeding or something equally horrific. Miracle might have been a runt or injured, deemed unprofitable and dumped like trash. The cruelty was beyond comprehension. Amid the darkness, Miracle remained a beacon of light. With every day that passed, the puppy grew stronger, playful, full of boundless affection for and her family. In the mornings, she bounced around's bedroom, yipping happily for breakfast. In the evenings, she curled up in its lap, content to doze while read or studied. That unconditional love and the memory of how close Miracle had come to dying fueled determination to keep her safe. But just when it seemed the police presence had deterred any further threats, the unbelievable happened. On a stormy night when thunder rumbled across the sky and rain lashed at the windows, heard a strangled yelp from the backyard. She dashed downstairs, nearly slipping on the wet floor in her rush. The back door was flung open, water pooling inside, and her father stood in the doorway, baseball bat in hand. Lightning flashed, illuminating the yard in stark white light. In that split second, saw a figure crouched near the fence, holding something. Her heart seized Miracle. The person was clutching Miracle by the scruff, trying to force her under the fence or into a bag. It all happened so fast, the scene surreal. Her father shouted, charging forward. The figure dropped Miracle, who let out a terrified squeal. Saw a flash of metal, a glint of a knife. Panic ignited. Her father swung the bat, the intruder ducked, but a second swing connected with the intruder's forearm. A scream of pain split the night. The man, recognized him as the same gaunt figure who had appeared on their porch, stumbled, dropping the knife. He kicked out its father, then scrambled over the fence. Another flash of lightning revealed a second person, the woman, huddled outside the fence, urging him to hurry. Together they vanished into the storm's fury, leaving the yard silent except for the pounding rain. Rushed to Miracle, scooping her up. Her mother called 911 again, voice trembling. The puppy shook violently in its arms, eyes wide with terror but unhurt beyond some scrapes. Rain plastered its hair to her face as she cradled Miracle, relief washing over her in waves so intense she nearly collapsed. The black van was likely waiting for them somewhere, but with the storm raging, the criminals had chosen to flee on foot to avoid drawing more attention. When the police arrived, they documented everything, from the wet footprints to the dropped knife. An ambulance checked father's bruised leg. Thankfully, he wasn't seriously injured. The police assured them that the break-in attempt, combined with the evidence from the clinic and the property, was enough to issue warrants for the suspects. "We'll catch them," one officer promised. For the night felt like a turning point. The people who'd harmed Miracle were still out there, but they had left behind enough clues to hopefully be brought to justice. Most importantly, Miracle was safe and alive, curled up in its arms, whimpering softly but otherwise unharmed. In the days that followed, news spread across local channels. A local family's heroic efforts to save a dying puppy have led to new evidence of suspected animal abuse. Ms. Weber's shelter posted updates on their social media, praising courage. The story gained traction, shared and unshared by animal lovers outraged by the cruelty, but inspired by the rescue. Donations poured into the shelter's emergency fund, enough to cover not just Miracle's bills but those of other strays as well. Was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. Her once quiet life had become a swirl of interviews and messages from strangers thanking her and her family for saving Miracle. But she brushed aside any notion of being a hero. She knew all too well the terror and helplessness she'd felt that night. The real hero in her mind was Miracle, a tiny soul who refused to give up, despite all odds. Eventually, word came that the police had apprehended the couple. They had tried to leave the state, but the man's injured arm and the suspicious black van with a broken taillight drew attention at a gas station. Evidence linked them to dog-fighting rings in nearby counties. Stomach churned to think of the horrors those dogs endured, but at least these people wouldn't be harming animals anymore. That evening, sat quietly in her room, Miracle dozing by her feet. Outside, the sky was clear, the stars twinkling. It was a far cry from that stormy night of terror. She thought back to the very beginning, that mysterious, irresistible pull that led her out of the house late at night, the trembling puppy under the bush, the frantic scramble to keep it alive. So much had happened since then, fear, heartbreak, near tragedy. Yet here they were, safe and together. Lifted Miracle onto her lap, burying her face in the pup's soft fur. Miracle stirred, blinking up at her with warm, trusting eyes. A tiny pink tongue emerged for a lick. Smiled, heart overflowing with profound gratitude. By all logical measures, Miracle should never have survived. The injuries, the infection, the relentless pursuit by cruel people, it all seemed insurmountable. Yet some force greater than logic had pulled them through, weaving an unbelievable tale of resilience and kindness. She carried Miracle to the window, gazing at the moonlit street. The world looked so peaceful now, no sign of menace. If she closed her eyes, she could recall that faint whimper from beneath the bush, the adrenaline pounding in her veins. She hugged Miracle, whispering, "You're safe forever. We did it." The puppy wagged her tail as though she understood every word. Knew that life would go on, school, chores, daily routines, but nothing would ever be quite the same. She had witnessed both the deepest cruelty and the most profound compassion in a matter of weeks. The entire neighborhood had come together in support. Her own parents had shown her that even in moments of panic, their love was unwavering. And within's young heart, a new fire burned, an unshakable commitment to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Months passed. Miracle grew from a timid, underweight pup into a spirited young dog with boundless energy. Her once dull fur became glossy, and her eyes sparkled with life. She loved chasing after tennis balls in the yard, tugging at squeaky toys, and curling up in bed at night. The vet marveled at her recovery, calling her a walking testament to the power of love and determination. Never forgot the dark nights of worry or the moment she almost lost Miracle to that final break-in. But those memories, once tinted with fear, now served as a reminder of how fragile life can be, and how important it is to stand up against cruelty whenever we encounter it. One sunny afternoon, and Miracle strolled through the neighborhood. Ms. Weber spotted them from her front porch, smiling and waving. "Well, look at you two," she called out. "Miracle's come a long way, you both have." Grinned, letting Miracle run up to Ms. Weber for a friendly pat on the head. "We owe you so much," said. "If you hadn't answered the phone that night." Ms. Weber shook her head gently. "You were the one who risked everything to bring that puppy home, who poured your heart into saving her. I just did what anyone should do, help. You followed that small voice inside you that said, 'Act now, don't look away.'" She paused, looking at the dog's wagging tail, and the results speak for themselves. That evening, as sat on her porch with Miracle curled at her feet, she reflected on the entire journey. She remembered the swirl of social media attention, the interviews, and how people kept calling it an unbelievable story. Indeed, had she not lived through it herself, she would have struggled to believe it all. The near-death discovery, the emotional roller coaster at the vet's, the confrontation with dangerous people, and the eventual triumphant rescue that a community. Yet here they were, living proof that in the darkest moments hope can emerge from the places. Sometimes, A single act of bravery or compassion can spark a chain reaction that changes many lives at once. Felt a sudden surge of warmth. She closed her eyes, listening to the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze, feeling Miracle's soft breathing against her leg. A sense of peace washed over her, mingled with awe. She was just a kid who'd stepped outside late one night, following a feeling she couldn't ignore. That was all it took to alter fate for a helpless creature. Miracle shifted, nudging's hand for more pets. Chuckled, scratching behind the dog's ears. "You're my little Miracle," she whispered. Miracle responded with a playful lick. In that quiet moment, with the sun's last rays painting the sky orange and purple, felt an indescribable gratitude for the second chance they'd both been given. Because in saving the puppy's life, realized she had also discovered something about herself: courage, empathy, and the understanding that even when the odds seem impossible, there can be a path forward if you never give up. The story, passed around in viral posts and local news clips, made hearts across the country soar. People left comments online. "I cried reading this. Restores my faith in humanity. So proud of you and Miracle." The ripple effect continued as more awareness was brought to local shelters, leading to an uptick in adoptions. Stray animals found homes, volunteers stepped forward, and behind it all was one tiny puppy's unwavering will to live and one little girl's unstoppable resolve to help. Inhaled the sweet evening air, letting the distant hum of traffic remind her that life, in all its chaos and wonder, marched on. But for now, in her corner of the world, she found solace in the steady, gentle heartbeat of the puppy at her side. The memory of Miracle's peril and the improbability of her survival would always be part of their story. A story that proved sometimes, in the face of heartbreak, the most extraordinary miracles can happen. Gazing out at the horizon, felt tears of gratitude slip from her eyes, tears that held every ounce of fear, relief, and triumph experienced in those whirlwind weeks. From the first night she'd stumbled upon a dying puppy in the dark, to the final showdown that could have ended so much worse, each moment led to this perfect serenity. She thought about the hush in the hospital room when they didn't know if Miracle would make it, the warmth of Ms. Weber's presence at the clinic, the unwavering support of her parents. She thought about all the strangers online who had cheered them on from behind their screens, and she thought about the lesson she would carry for the rest of her life. Sometimes the smallest gestures, picking up a fragile, suffering creature off the ground, can spark the most tremendous outcomes. If you listen to that quiet voice urging you toward compassion, you might just witness what others would label unbelievable. She leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to Miracle's forehead. The puppy stirred, gazing up at her with adoring eyes. Smiled. "You want to go inside, Miracle?" The dog cocked her head as though understanding. Stood, leading the puppy back into the house where they both belonged, safe within the circle of love they had fought so hard to create. Outside, the first stars began to wink in the sky, shining on an ordinary suburban street that had been the backdrop for an extraordinary tale of survival and hope. Closed the door softly, locking out the night. She knew that tomorrow, and every day after, she and Miracle would greet the morning with open hearts, living reminders that no matter how dire the circumstance, there is always room for compassion, and sometimes that's all it takes to make the impossible come true.